Good evening again, brothers and sisters. Welcome to our session 15 this evening. We are going to cover two chapters. That's quite a lot, and there's really a lot to cover today, which is going to take us at least more than an hour again. And we are also going to look at Isaiah 23, which gives a similar prophecy on this nation and city-state of Tyre, and we'll try and bring it to the future to look at the comparison of Tyre with Mystery Babylon of the end times, another great maritime trade center that God is going to bring down in the seventh bowl judgment. Okay, so we are going to cover these three areas of scripture this evening, and let me quickly go through them so that we won't waste time. Okay, so last week we were introducing this second part of Ezekiel, where now the focus of Ezekiel's prophecy now is on the nations that are around Israel, that have been ridiculing Israel and that has been tormenting the nation of Israel through the years. All right, so the basic warning of Ezekiel is God's covenant with Abraham, since Genesis chapter 12. If you curse Israel, you will be cursed. But if you stand by Israel, there will be God's blessing for you in the end. So we are literally taking Genesis 12, verses 1 to 3, up to today. All right, how nations relate to Israel is very, very important based on that scripture in Genesis chapter 12, because God has that special position, special function, special purpose for Israel. And Israel is not going to be like any other nation, because Israel was called out ever since the Garden of Eden, when God's plan is for that nation to bring forth the Messiah, the seed of the woman that will eventually destroy the work of the evil one. So Israel has that special calling, and if nations do not understand that calling and ridicule Israel, then they are failing to fall in line with God's intention for his entire creation. All right, so those with long-term hostility towards Israel, especially since the time of what we looked at last week, all right, the sons of Isaac, Esau, and Jacob. So all this animosity, so if it's not healed and is prolonged, the hostility against your brother nation Israel, then in the end, you are going to reap from all the malice you have sown. Right, so we were looking at four nations last week. We were supposed to look at four, but I had only time to look at Ammon, Moab, and Edom. That's on the east bank of River Jordan. That's the modern area of Jordan itself. All right, and today we are going to look at to the west. Right, we are going to look at Philistines and Tyre. I didn't finish Philistine last week. All right, so these four nations in chapter 25 of Ezekiel are being judged by God because they did not honor that Abrahamic covenant that God had set for the nation of Israel. All right, and they came against the seed of Abraham. They didn't bless, but they cursed, they ridiculed the nation of Israel, and that has end time repercussions until today. All right, especially we look at Ammon and Moab, their wicked joy at the downfall of Israel. Much like today, people just want to wipe out the nation of Israel from the map of the world. And that's really going against the purposes of God. All right, so we're going to continue that. You can imagine we were looking at the east, Ammon, then down south Moab, then down right up to Gulf of Gaza, Edom. Now we are making a clockwise motion right to the Gaza Strip now, which is the Philistines, right? Right. So let me just take a few slides, what we couldn't finish last week, to look at the prophecy against this area, which is currently in Gaza. But during the time of Ezekiel, Philistia occupied actually the entire coast of Israel, all the way right up to Lebanon, right? So that area, what you see light blue and dark blue is all the Philistine kingdom. In fact, it possessed all of Canaan during that time. All right, so when Israel came in under Joshua, the Philistines were there. So you can imagine all the battle against the Philistines when the people of Israel crossed the Jordan, because the Philistines had come to occupy that area. All right, and parallel verses on the judgment on Philistine is found in Jeremiah 47 and Isaiah chapter 14. So these three books has this judgment on the nations. All right, so chapter 25, verse 15, that's where we stopped last week. This is what the sovereign Lord says: because the Philistines acted in vengeance, took revenge with malice in their hearts, with ancient hostility, and they sought to destroy Judah. Look at all the offensive words there. All right, vengeance, revenge, malice, ancient hostility, seeking to destroy. You see these same five adjectives today in that area against Israel. They just want to destroy Israel. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says: I'm about to stretch out my hand against the Philistines, and I will wipe out the Kerethites and destroy those remaining along the coast. They settle all along the coast. I will carry out great vengeance on them, punish them in my wrath. Then they will know that I am the Lord. Then the nation, they will know when I take vengeance on them. All right, so let's look at the background of where the Philistines come from. All right, they are seafarers from the island of Chapter. Right, that was mentioned in Amos. That is also mentioned in Deuteronomy. Way back during the time of Moses, they were already around. They had already come to occupy the land of Canaan, as I mentioned just now, in the absence of the Jews when they were in 430 years of captivity in Egypt. Right. So when Moses and Joshua led them back there, they found the land full of Philistines. Right. So the origin of the Philistines is in Crete. Chapter is the old name for the island of Crete today, which is actually just south of this small island there. That's Santorini, and that's Mykonos. Those of you who have been to these two Greek islands of Mykonos and Santorini, Crete is just south of there. All right, that's where they are from. They are from this Greek islands area. All right, their main civilization is in Crete. They occupied Cyprus, they occupied southern Turkey, all of Canaan, as I mentioned, and they even took Egypt during their what they call adventurous days. Right, and we are told in Joshua chapter 13, they set up these five cities. Right, Gath, Gaza, Ekron, Ashdod, Ascalon, and these five cities, they are still there today in southern Israel and in the Gaza Strip. Those five cities are mentioned there in Joshua chapter 13. You find that when Joshua came in and fought them, the Philistines, right? They are Goliath is a Philistine, all right? So these are giants. They are part of the Philistine group, and Joshua defeated them in the mountains, but they all escaped to Gath, we are told. And Joshua left them there. All right, Joshua couldn't remove them there from the Gaza area, and it was left until the time of David to defeat the Philistines. Right? So we will look at that first. We are told in Joshua chapter 11, as I mentioned just now, he took the whole land, but this area of southern Judah, right? We had looked at Ammon, Moab, so we are going clockwise here. So this whole area is where the Philistines escaped to, Gaza especially, and Joshua left them there. Okay, we are told that in Joshua chapter 11. So when the judges came in, you find Samson always had that battle with the Philistines. All right, so they are a very strong group, and even Delilah is a Philistine. You remember that, huh? And we are told in 1 Samuel 13 and Judges chapter 14, they are a very, very formidable force because this is during the time of the Iron Age, and the Philistines developed iron blades and iron arrowheads. all right, which makes their artillery much stronger than the other surrounding tribes and stronger than the Israelites that had come out of Egypt, all right? Then in 1 Samuel chapter 4, right, we are told of this battle with the Philistines when they lost the battle, right? The Israelites lost the battle. They brought the ark out, right? They brought the ark out from Shiloh and hoping that the ark of God would be their victor. But God never asked them to go out and fight the Philistines, and they were defeated soundly, and the Philistines captured the ark and took the ark to Ashdod. All right, so Ashdod here, about 20 kilometers north of the Gaza border, all right, today. And that was when the Hebrews gave up and thought that it's because they don't have a good king and they asked for that king, and that's how Saul came in. So it was during that time, right? And they wanted to be like any other nation, and they protested to Samuel, we want a king. And that's how Saul got elected to represent them. So it was during that time. And how, David came after that, and how David helped Saul to defeat the Philistine in 1 Samuel 17 when he took off the head of Goliath. All right. And then I told you last week, Goliath had four other brothers, right? And they are all taken away defeated by King David's men later in 2 Samuel chapter 21. All right. So that's a little bit of history of the battle between the Israelites and the Philistines. All right. Now, so that area today, I'm bringing you today now, this is Gaza Strip. Okay. That small area here, right to the border of Egypt. Now, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, they are all part of southern Israel today. Previously, during Joshua's time, they were all part of Gaza. They are all part of the Philistine area. But since 1967, you find that Israel has taken much of southern Israel. So only a small segment is left that is known as the Gaza Strip. And within Gaza Strip, in 1967, during the 60 Yom Kippur War, they took this area, this purple area here, known as Gush Katif, right to the Egyptian border. So all this Gaza Strip was actually occupied by Israeli forces after 1967. But it became very difficult to defend them because all around them were the Hamas, the PLO under Abbas, and so on. And in 2005, when Prime Minister Ariel Sharon decided to pull the settlers out from Gush Katif, right? So you find he pulled out from these two enclaves, Netzarim and Gush Katif. So you find that throughout history, 1929, 1946, 1948, Jewish settlers had moved into this Philistine area to occupy them, but because of the animosity of the descendants of the Philistines, today's PLO and so on, they found tough settling there, and the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, had to spend millions to try and protect Jewish settlements in the Gaza Strip. So in 2005, they decided to pull out. And so today, all the Gaza Strip is now under PLO and under Hamas. So the Nazarene was pulled out, and you have some pictures. Go and research that. Look at this word Gush Katif pull out. It was a very tragic case, and how they were forced by their own Israeli military to really abandon all their settlements there and settle outside of Gaza Strip today. So you find that this continued to today, the violence between the Hamas or the Philistines of today with Israel today. Just last year, between January and May 2021, 4,000 rockets the Hamas were firing into Israel, Ashkelon, Ashdod, all the way even to Tel Aviv. Nowadays, can reach that area that's about 100, more than 120 kilometers north. And of course, Israel will fight back, and this is Israel bombing Gaza here. All right, overkill. And every time when Israel hit back, they are condemned by the world. All right, and so these are the Patriot missiles trying to intercept all the Hamas rockets. It is the mission of Hamas to totally destroy Israel. All right, so this is what Fatih Hamad said, is their political leader there in Hamas. The goal of Hamas is the total destruction of Israel. All right, and that is still their design today. Huh? And these are the tunnels. So they dig from Gaza, they dig numerous tunnels right across in Gaza here, right into Israel. Right, so I give to you, there are 40,000 rockets that they are boasting that they have, the Hamas here, to shoot into Israel, right? And the M302 rockets can reach all across to the northern border of Israel today, all right? So no place in Israel is safe from the Hamas rockets today. And who is supplying all these rockets? Okay, the men from the east. We were looking at Iran, right? So Iran's proxy is Hamas today, right? So that's what we are having today. Now let's look at Ashkelon. Okay, so Ashkelon, and look at the map just now again. So Ashkelon, Ashdod is today southern Israel. Right? So Ashkelon is well developed today, but I want to refer back to the verse that we looked at last week, right? When Christ comes again, how he set free the hidden ones in Petra, in Edom, and how they attacked the Edomites in the west. But look what happened to the Philistines during the same time. Well, Isaiah 11, verse 13 to 14, that's a prophecy of the future. Then the jealousy of Ephraim will depart, and those who harass Judah will be cut off. Ephraim will no longer be jealous with Judah. Judah will no longer harass Ephraim. So this is the coming restoration of Israel when the 10 northern tribes, and Judah is the southern tribe. Ephraim is always the 10 northern tribes, is the collective noun for the Israel in the north. So there's going to be a unity of both northern Israel and southern Israel when Christ returns. All right. So he says there will be this day, and Ezekiel also prophesied about the two sticks joining together to become one. We are coming to that later. Huh? So these are the two sticks, Ephraim and Judah, are united in the end days, and they will swoop down on the slopes of the Philistines on the west. That means on the west from Edom, they are going to come down to the coast on the west. That's the Philistine area. And together, they will plunder the sons of the east. And we saw that last week. Edom, Moab, and Ammon will be defeated by them when the tribe of Judah comes out from Edom. All right, so it looks like when they are released from Petra, they are going to be victorious on both the east side and the west side of Jordan. Israel attacked the Philistines at the same time that they attacked the Ammonites and the Edomites and the Moabites. All right, so that's what we looked at, and the other verse that we looked at last week in Obadiah, the same thing. And they of the south, people in southern Israel, shall possess the mounts of Esau. All right, so and they of the lowland shall possess Philistines. Right, so here's last week I didn't deal with the Philistines, so I skipped over that. So you find that the Israeli settlers of the south will possess the area of the Philistines. And we see that being fulfilled today. I showed you the picture of Ashkelon, right, today, which is just 10 kilometers north of the border of Gaza, very near to the Gaza border. And look at the development there. And this is Ashdod, which is 20 kilometers north of Ashkelon. Right, so these are all in the areas of the south, and they will be occupied by Jewish settlers, like what is happening today. But I want to take you to Zephaniah chapter 2, all right, to see what will be the eventual fate of the Philistines. All right, Zephaniah prophesied that. He said, for Gaza will be abandoned. Ashkelon becomes a desolation. But we see Ashkelon so developed today. Ashdod will be driven out at noon, and Ekron will be completely uprooted. All right? Woe to the inhabitants of the seacoast, the nation of the Cretites. Crete, all right, they come from Crete, the island of Crete. The word of the Lord is against you, O Canaan. All right, I told you just some Philistines occupied that whole area. It's known as the land of the Philistines. I will destroy you so that there will be no more inhabitant. Now, so when is this going to happen? Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, all going to be desolated again. We are seeing that today these areas are all well developed already. Israel has occupied them. So is this prophecy of Zephaniah fulfilled before present day Israel, right? That Nebuchadnezzar would come and destroy all these areas during the time of Nebuchadnezzar, all right? Or is this talking about the future? All right, because in Isaiah chapter 14, look at this verse, you go back and read that. Isaiah 14, verse 29 to 31. Isaiah prophesied that God is going to call out an enemy from the north. A cloud will come from the north. And I mentioned that to you at the end times, the king of the north shall come like a cloud to attack that whole region and even enter into Egypt, passing through all these areas. So Isaiah prophesied the destruction of these areas when the king of the north attacks Israel again and right into Egypt, Libya, and Sudan. So are we seeing this in the future when Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Gaza all will be destroyed by the king of the north or the Antichrist? Some would like to associate the king of the north with Antichrist. So is this a prophecy to be fulfilled in the future? And then Zephaniah looks beyond that and says, and the sea coast will become pastures, with the caves for shepherds and folds for flocks, and the coast will be for the remnant of the house of Judah. So I mentioned that to you last week. The remnant of the house of Judah, where are they? They are the ones that came out with Christ from Petra. This is the remnant, the hidden ones. All right? So they are going to come and occupy that, as we saw just now in Isaiah chapter 11. As they conquer Edom, they will also conquer the sea coast. Right? So the coast will now become for the remnant house of Judah. They will pasture it again, and in the houses of Ashkelon, they will lie down in the evening, for the Lord their God will care for them and restore back their fortune. Right? So again, we bring to the end time when all these areas will again be restored to the people of Israel, where Joshua failed, but David succeeded, and so it's going to go back to the people of David. Okay, so that's a little bit on Philistia and Gaza Strip today. Let me quickly go on to Tyre now. Tyre, there are 3 chapters here to cover. Tyre, we won't be able to cover them all. So we'll cover only 26 and 27 today. We'll leave chapter 28 for next week. Okay, now, why did Ezekiel spend 3 whole chapters on this nation of Tyre, right? When he spent just 1 chapter 25 on all these Ammon, Moab, Philistia, and so on. Okay, and so why 3 whole chapters? And then after that, when we are done with chapter 28, he's going to spend 4 chapters on Egypt, right? So that's going to take us another 2 sessions after next week, right? So why 7 chapters just on Tyre and Egypt, right? Because you find that throughout history, all right, Tyre and Egypt are the most formidable enemies of Israel, all right? So we're going to cover that today. Also, because Tyre and Egypt, we're going to cover the next 3 studies, symbolizes the pride of nations, all right? So it's not just ancient hostility, but a pride in their wealth, a pride in their position, and that's something that God hates, right? Because when nations are elevated, it's because God was blessing them. And when they refuse to acknowledge God, then God takes away that wealth, that self-sufficiency, that self-rule, and so on. All right. So that is the main theme in Scripture. All right. When God hates pride and He comes against pride. Huh? The other reason why Ezekiel deals a lot with Tyre is this. It is not just the people and the king of Tyre, but there is some force that is behind Tyre. All right, some spiritual power that is behind Tyre. And we are going to look at that next week in Ezekiel chapter 28. All right. We are not dealing with the people and the king of Tyre anymore, but the prince of Tyre, just as Gabriel had to fight with the prince of Persia. You remember that, right? So there are high places and what they call kingdoms in spiritual high places that control these earthly kingdoms, right? So we're going to go back to that. And also, the reason why we are looking at Tyre in Egypt is this, because it projects us into the future. Because the pride of Tyre, or the excellence and the greatness of Tyre, is going to be played out again in the end times in Mystery Babylon. All right, the merchant center, the mercantile trade center, and the global world trade center today, and the one world government today. Right? Whereas in the time of Ezekiel, Tyre resembles that, but it's going to come up again in the end times as the mystery Babylon. All right. And if you have time today, we're going to look at that. All right. So let's quickly go to 26 now. In the 11th month of the 12th year, on the first day of the month, word of the Lord came to me. So 11th month, 12th year is now 585 BC. It's more than a year after the fall of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar. So it says, Son of man, because Tyre has said of Jerusalem, aha, there you go again. We heard this word last week, right? Who was it that said aha? Ammon, right? Ammon was the one who said it. So Tyre had the same malicious joy at the fall of a competitor nation, right? So aha, the gate to the nations is broken. Jerusalem, huh? Its doors have swung open to me, and now she lies in ruins. I will prosper. Okay, so remember this. All right, so when we take joy in the fall of the competitors so that we can prosper because others fall, God says He hates that. Proverbs 17. All right, therefore, because you hold this kind of attitude, you prosper and you take joy in the fall of your enemy so that you can prosper. I am against you. Tyre. Right? Because you hold this attitude, God says, I am against you. Right? And it's very, very dangerous when God says that to anyone. I am against you. Right? There means nothing on earth can help us anymore. And I will bring many nations against you like the sea casting out its wave. That means there's going to be waves and waves of invaders that are coming to destroy you. So there's going to be two judgments there. Firstly, I am against you. And secondly, nations, I'm going to raise nations to come up against you. All right. So this is the sin of Tyre. They waited for Jerusalem's fall and then they went in to plunder it. Okay. So be careful with our aha, right? Don't take joy, don't rejoice at the fall of our enemies, right? Because God says, I'm against you. You're taunting the nation that I love. If you curse them, you'll be cursed. So even though Jerusalem is gone, even though God has to judge them, but God hasn't forgotten his covenant with them. All right. So just remember that. All right. So verse 4 says this, and they, the nations that come against you, they will destroy the walls of Tyre and pull down all your towers. And then you see, they and I, so the two-pronged judgment on Tyre. I will scrape away all your rubble and make her a bare rock, make Tyre a bare rock. Out in the sea, she will become just a place to spread fishermen's nets. For I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord, she will become plunder for the nations, and her settlements on the mainland will be ravaged by the sword. Then they will know that I am the Lord. Okay, so today if you go to Tyre, it's just a fishing town. So there are actually 6 judgments in this verse, 4 or 5 verses in Ezekiel 26 here. He says, verse 3, I'm against you, and then hostile nations are going to pound you like waves. So we find that Nebuchadnezzar came, all right, after immediately destroying Israel in 586 BC, he came to Tyre, and he spent 13 years trying to destroy Tyre. You'll find out why he uh, he couldn't do it, because of that offshore island fortress. And then Persia came in 525 BC. After Persia destroyed Babylon, you remember that during the time of Daniel, Belshazzar, all right? So 539, Persia took Babylon, and then 10 years later, 525 BC, Persia came to destroy Tyre. And then Greece, 250 years after Persia, under Alexander the Great, came again to destroy Tyre. And then Antiochus Epiphanes, 169 BC, came. We saw that in Daniel chapter 11. He also destroyed Tyre. And then finally, Rome came and took over that whole area of Lebanon, known as that. So this prophecy has been fulfilled up to that time when God says, I will bring nations to come and destroy you. You come up, I'll destroy you again. You come up, I'll destroy you again. And it was completely destroyed by the Islamic Empire in 1350 until archaeologists had a hard time trying to find out where ancient Tyre was, right? Now, today, Tyre, the mainland city, is known as Ushu. Okay, and we are told in verse 4, under Nebuchadnezzar, he will be put to the sword. The mainland city will be completely destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, the towers of Tyre and the walls of Tyre will also be destroyed, but the island fortress, all right, there's another fortress on the offshore island here. God says, I'm going to reduce it to rubble. Now, Nebuchadnezzar didn't do that. It was Alexander who did that. We'll look at that later. So God says, I'm going to reduce your whole island fortress to become rubble. I'm going to scrape you away, and only a bare rock will remain. Right? And Tyre, by the way, the word Tyre in Greek means rock. Right? So God is saying that you will become a bare rock in the end. Right? And so those are the judgments. Right? So let's look a little bit on Tyre now. Tyre, right, as I mentioned, they came from Phoenicia, this whole area. The Phoenician presence is here, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and Turkey today. It is the capital of the commercial empire of Phoenicia, right? So Phoenicia occupied from East Mediterranean all the way to Israel today. So its main fort is in the island here, half a mile offshore. The island, the mainland city is Ushu, right? And together they form the city-state of Tyre, right? And it was very influential for 1000 BC during the time of King David and so on. Tyre was already a great commercial empire. Joshua, when he came in, found it to be a strong city. All right, so when Joshua came in, Tyre was already there. During the time of David and Solomon, there was a friendly relation. All right, David didn't conquer Tyre. All right, and King Hiram of Tyre became friends with King David and Solomon, and if you remember, supplied timber for King David and Solomon to build Solomon's temple. Right, so all the timber, the cedar of Lebanon came from Tyre, floated down the Mediterranean coast down to Jerusalem for them to build the temple. And later, when Nehemiah came back after the captivity, Of course, Persia, the king of Persia, ordered, because Persia had already taken Tyre at that time. All right, Persia ordered the king of Tyre to supply timber to Nehemiah to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem as well. Okay, so there was this relation between Israel and Tyre, good relation. And we find that Solomon, earlier on, when Solomon was looking for gold in Saudi Arabia, he engaged all the sailors from Tyre. Right? Tyre was known for its seafarers. All right, so you see, the fleet of Tyre went all over the Mediterranean to southern Spain. This is known as Tarshish. Right? Those of you who have been reading about Tarshish, is here all the way to England. Is Tarshish area. They founded Carthage. All right, Carthage, the new city. So when Nebuchadnezzar attacked them, they all flee from this island of Tyre to set up a new base in Carthage. Those of you who know Carthage came out Hannibal and so on later. So these are some good history of the ancient times. But Tyre also supplied Jezebel to Israel. Right? So it's all not just good news. So during the time of Ahab, right, the princess of Tyre, Jezebel, was married to Ahab, and she brought in all the what do you call Baal and so on into Israel, right? And we are told that Tyre captured Jewish slaves and sold them to the Edomites. That's another sin of Tyre, right? So all these are some of the history there. Isaiah 23, I ask you to read Isaiah 23, where Isaiah prophesied that Tyre, you are a kingmaker, right? So Isaiah said, Tyre, you are a bestower of crowns. Your merchants are princes. Your traders are the honorable of the earth. So looking at Tyre as a kingdom where money rules, not royalty. Right? The merchants are the kings there. The merchants are the one that make kingmakers. They make kings, right? So it's a kingdom where business and wealth reign supreme, right? And we are seeing that happening today as well, right? So that's what it is. So that's the sin of Tyre, right? Greed has overcome them. They had no spiritual sense of values, only what they can gain from the downfall of others. All right, only material and economic value. So when Jerusalem fell, now listen, right? Jerusalem controlled the land trade. Jerusalem had always been the center of the world. God put Jerusalem there to control all the land trade between Asia and Europe and Africa, all right? So it controls the land routes. But Tyre controlled all the sea routes. So when Jerusalem fell, Tyre said, aha, now I control both sea and land routes if I take Jerusalem. All right, so that's the joy, the malicious joy of Tyre. All right, so we are seeing here, and if I can project this later into the future, we are seeing this same thing happening to the trading centers of the modern world today. New York, London, Abu Dhabi. These are all maritime centers that control maritime trade. And if they can control land trade as well, the British Empire grew up because of that. They control the seas, they control the land routes, and so on. And is Tyre going to be symbolized today in the end times by these great world centers that Revelation Chapter 18 talks about in the end times, right? A great trading center that we are seeing being established in the world today. And God says, I'm going to use other nations to destroy Tyre, right? So as I mentioned to you just now, all these other nations that came. Right? So when Rome came later on, that was a time when Jesus visited Tyre. Right? So Jesus visited Tyre and Sidon, if you remember, in Matthew chapter 15, when Jesus came to Tyre and Sidon and met the Syro-Phoenician woman who pleaded with Jesus to heal her daughter, which was oppressed by evil spirit. And Jesus says, I didn't come to heal the heathens. Right? My bread is for the Jews. And the woman says, even dogs, all right, are entitled to the crumbs below the table. So Jesus commended her for her faith and healed her daughter. Okay, that's in Matthew 15 and Mark chapter 7. Again, a picture of God's mercy, not just being limited to the Jews, but also to whomsoever who would call out and fall to the mercy of God, like this Syro Phoenician woman in Tyre. Okay, and Jesus criticized his own people there. He said this: "Woe unto you, Chorazin, the town in northern Lake Galilee! Woe unto you, Bethsaida, and woe unto you, Capernaum, also the three cities that Jesus condemned, because he has worked multiple miracles in these cities, and they still chose to reject him. But he came once into Tyre and Sidon, and there was this great faith of this heathen woman." So Jesus said, "Woe unto you, all this! If the mighty works that I did in you have been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago. I went there just once, and there was this repentance already there. But I've come to you so, in fact, Capernaum is the headquarters of Jesus in the northern shore of Lake Galilee, and they have never accepted him there. So in the great judgment seat, in the great white throne judgment, he says this, that Tyre and Sidon will be treated better than you in the judgment day. Okay, we are told in Acts chapter 21 also that Paul spent 7 days in Tyre. Okay, on his trip to Rome. All right, good. Now, so we look at the destruction of Tyre under Nebuchadnezzar first. All right, from the north, I will bring against Tyre Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, king of kings, with horses, chariots, great army. He, Nebuchadnezzar, will ravage your settlements on the mainland. All right, that means Nebuchadnezzar is going to destroy Ushu. With a sword, he will set up a siege against you. He will build rams up your walls, raise his shield against you. He will direct his rams on your walls and demolish your towers. His horses, so many, will cover you with dust. Your walls will tremble at the noise of the war horses and chariots when he enters your gates as men enter a city whose walls have been broken. So chapter 7, verse 7 to verse 10, all about Nebuchadnezzar coming in 85 BC. And now suddenly in verse 12, they will plunder. Okay, so the pronoun has shifted from he to they. But remember earlier on in verse 4, we are told God says, I will bring multiple nations to destroy you. So this they now may be referring to other nations after Nebuchadnezzar. They will plunder your wealth, loot your merchandise, break down your walls, demolish all your houses, throw your stones, timber, and rubble into the sea. Now, verse 13. Right, so you have Nebuchadnezzar, you have the nation, and then God himself says, I will put an end to all your noisy songs, to all your music. All right, so Tyre, Lebanon is the center of wealth during those times. Okay, I will make you a bare rock, and you will become a place to spread fish nets, and you will never be rebuilt. For I, the Lord, has spoken now. Is this, I will make you a bare rock, talking about the near fulfillment or future fulfillment? Okay, we are going to look at that when we come to Revelation chapter 18. Now, keep in mind all these words. They are going to be repeated in the end times. I'll put an end to all your songs. The music of your harps will no longer be heard. All right? And you will never be rebuilt. All right? So this is God's message. It has a near fulfillment and it has an end time fulfillment. The near fulfillment is 250 years ahead of Nebuchadnezzar, Alexander is going to come. All right. So from 586 BC, when Nebuchadnezzar came to Tyre, and 332 BC, that's 250 years in the future, Alexander is going to come. And he's going to scrape away everything and reduce that island fortress into a bare rock. So God is saying, how I judge Tyre through Alexander, through Nebuchadnezzar, and in the end, how I will bring down judgment on the end time Tyre, Babylon, okay? I'll do it again, right? So, is this a picture of what Antichrist will do to Lebanon in the end times? All right, Isaiah chapter 23 talks about it. So I gave you that verse just now. So let's look at Alexander first. Alexander came in 332 BC. Again, he conquered the mainland city. And again, he found difficult to cross this sea because the main fortress of Tyre was in this island of Tyre. And it's half a mile across. So he pretended to be friend with the king of Tyre and asked permission to visit this island to go and worship their god Melkat, which has an equivalent in Greek mythology, which is Hercules. Right? So Melkat in Tyre tradition is the Greek Hercules of the Greek god. All right. So he wants to come and worship Hercules in this temple. Now, this temple shouldn't be here. It's further south. Okay, it's further south. And that's where the ruins are today. And but the Tyrians will not allow any foreigners to worship Melkat, their god, in the temple. No foreigners are allowed. Right? So they refuse Alexander to visit that island. And so in his fury, Alexander spent a year destroying everything here and throwing all the rocks and rubbles into the sea to build a causeway, a half a mile causeway. All right. There are 50 marble pillars sunk in this area. Archaeologists counted. All right. Huge pillars. 50 of them sunk there with all the rubble to make a causeway for the forces of Alexander to invade this island. And Alexander destroyed it in the end. Right. So that's the ancient picture of Tyre and the mainland, and this is today. Right. So that causeway is now all filled up and it's all being rebuilt there. There's residences there already. Okay. Now, so this is Tyre, right, about 50 kilometers north of the border of Israel, and then Sidon, another 20 kilometers north, and then Beirut. Those of you who are old enough, like me, there was a time in the 70s when Beirut was the most extravagant city in the Middle East. It was known as Paris of the East, right? And the tourist center of everyone from Europe and Asia would be visiting Beirut. All right, Hollywood makes it a film center. There are so many films of Beirut and so on. But look at what happened to Beirut today. It's completely gone, destroyed. Huh? And I'll come to Beirut later. And so in verse 15, when I read verse 15, think of Alexander and also think of end time, when Antichrist is going to come. Right? The sovereign Lord says to Tyre, will not the coastlands tremble at the sound of your fall? When the wounded groan and the slaughter takes place in you, all the princes of the coast will step off their thrones in fear, lay aside their robes, all their garments, and clothe themselves with terror. And they will sit on the ground trembling and appalled at your destruction. They will lament and they will say to you, how are you destroyed? Such a renowned city, people by men of the sea, you were a power on the sea, you were kingmakers according to Isaiah, and you put your terror on all who lived around the sea there, but now The coastlands are trembling on the day of your fall. The islands of the seas, all the Greek islands there, they are terrified at your collapse. Now, this is, if you read Isaiah 23, it tells you a lot more. How the Egyptians were in shock, how the people in Cyprus, they were all numb with fear when they see that Tyre fall, maybe under Alexander, maybe in the future. Huh? And we are told in verse 19, God says, I will make you a desolate city, no longer inhabited. It's inhabited today. So is this into the future? When I bring the ocean depths over you and its vast waters cover you. Babylon is going to sink one day. Huh? Then I'll bring you down to Sheol, to the pit, to the people of long ago. All right, you will join your ancestors. I'll make you dwell on the earth below Sheol. As ancient ruins, you will not return and take your place in the land of the living. That means you will no longer be a thriving nation as you were before. Even though today, if you go to Tyre, there's a city there. This is actually the mainland Tyre and small tourist town as well as fishing. Right? And I will bring you to a horrible end, and you will be no more. You'll be sought, but you can't be found. So archaeologists took so long to try and find it after the Muslim empire completely razed Tyre to the ground in the 14th century. Okay. Now, in Isaiah it says this, but at the end of the 70 years, the Lord will visit Tyre again, and she will return to her lucrative prostitution. She will ply her trade with all the kingdoms on the face of the earth again, but yet her profit and her earnings will be set apart for the Lord. They will not be stored up or hoarded. Her profits will go to those who live before the Lord for abundant food and fine wine or something. I missed the word there. So it says this, Tyre will be restored after the end of 70 years. Isaiah says that, not Ezekiel. So when is this restoration of Tyre? Okay, is it today? The Lord will visit with Tyre. It means Jesus did go there. Also, some people took this as means during the Roman times, Jesus is going to come to Tyre. The Lord will visit them. But is it talking about the future here? And so we don't know. What is this 70 years here? Okay, so some of these verses are puzzling, and we don't pretend to be able to interpret this Isaiah 23. The last two verses in Isaiah 23 says there is going to be a revival of Tyre in the end. All right, that you will be able, they'll be going to come out this city in the end time to continue on her gross materialism, all right, with all the kingdoms of the world again. But then all her riches are not going to be hers. It's going to belong to the Lord in the end. Okay, that God is going to take everything again. So is this talking about the end time when Christ returns and destroy mystery Babylon, right? So then we come to chapter 27 now, quickly. Huh? Chapter 27 is a funeral song for Tyre, continuing with chapter 26. Take a lament concerning Tyre. Say to Tyre, situated at the gateway of the sea, there were two huge pillars guarding the city of Tyre. Okay, you say, Tyre, I am perfect in beauty. There's the pride there. All right, Tyre looks around. There's no one to match its excellence, right? So I am perfect in my beauty. I'm prosperous. I'm proud. My domain is the high seas. Your builders have perfected your beauty. All your timbers of juniper were from Syria, cedar from Lebanon for your mast. So this is talking about the ship here. All right, so it pictures Tyre as a huge merchant ship. All right, and the construction of Tyre is a picture of how the ship of Tyre was constructed. All right, so Your cedar was your must from Lebanon, oaks from Bashan, Syria, was your oars, and cypress from Cyprus for your deck. So the best timber went into making your boat. So Tyre, you are perfect in your construction. That's what you boast, all right? So the best of all the material came into my city. And you are adorned with ivory. Your fine embroidered linen from Egypt was your sail of the ship, the banner of the ship. Your awnings were of blue and purple from the coast of Elisha, that's the western Cyprus. So it was perfectly constructed, it was perfectly decorated with the best ornaments. And then the men of Sidon and Arvad were your sailors, veteran craftsmen of Byblos were there to clean your boat, and all the ships of the sea came alongside to trade for your wares. So here is a perfect personnel you had, perfect crew. All right, so Tyre had the best of everything. All right, the best construction, the best decoration, and the best seamen in the world. I told you just now how Solomon had to use them to help him sail to the coast of Africa to look for gold. But now look at verse 26 now. The east wind, the east wind will break you to pieces far out at sea. Okay, again, so who is this east wind? Okay, is it Nebuchadnezzar? Because Alexander is the west. All right, so we are looking at someone from the east that will come to destroy Tyre in the future. Okay, your wealth and wealth, your mariners, shipwrights, your merchants, your soldiers, everyone on board will sink into the sea on the day of your shipwreck. The shorelands will quake when your sailors cried out, and all who handle the oars will abandon their ships. The mariners, sailors will stand on the shore and they will cry bitterly over you. They will sprinkle dust on their heads. This is a Middle East custom of showing remorse and grief, rolling their ashes. They will shave their heads, put on sackcloth. They will weep over you with anguish of soul and bitter mourning. So there is this universal lament over the destruction of this great empire and this great city, a glorious shipwreck in the end. All right. And they will lament over you and say, who was ever silenced like Tyre, completely buried by the sea, completely gone? When your merchandise went out to sea, you traded with many nations, your great wealth enriched the kings of the earth. Look at all this language. We are going to see it again in Revelation chapter 18. But now you are shattered by the sea and you have gone down into the depths of the sea. You were unsinkable. You were such a mighty nation, perfect in every way. No one thought you would sink, and yet you have gone into the depths of the water. Now, where have you heard that before? Here. Right, so when the Titanic sailed off from England, they'll say that this ship is unsinkable, right? Unsinkable, right? And everyone said cannot sink, and it sank. It did. All right, so you know the story of the Titanic, right? So the whole world was shocked that such a majestic ship, impregnable, cannot sink one. It sank. When God wanted it to sink, it sank. So same thing with Tyre. Again, nobody thought it would fall. Like today, no one thinks that this World Trade Organization in the end time will fall, but God is going to bring it down. Revelation chapter 16 at the seventh bowl. Okay, so we are seeing this again. So again, it talks about the horror of people. Their kings will shudder, their merchants among the nations will scoff at you, and you have come to a horrible end, and you will be no more. Mercy, mercy. All right, so this is what's happening to great city. Now, I bring you back to today. I told you about Beirut just now. You know what happened to Beirut last year? All right, there was this mighty explosion, 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate that the Hezbollah buried in some of these warehouses in Beirut. The Paris of the East, the most attractive center in the Middle East in the 70s and 80s, now completely destroyed. That explosion killed about 300 people. 5,000 people were injured with severe injuries. And until today, no one knows where that 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrates that Hezbollah was hiding in the port of Beirut. Right? So last year, the whole thing exploded. Right? The entire port was gone with that explosion. Okay, this is what it is today. Right? And Lebanon today is under Iran. Right? Iran has sent its proxies there. Is the headquarters of Iran. Iran has stationed all the missiles there. I told you just now, Gaza has 40,000 missiles. Lebanon has 160,000 missiles, all aimed at Israel today, all under Hamas, all supplied by Iran. Men from the east. The east wind will come and destroy you. The verse that we read just now. Iran is completely east of Lebanon today. So we are looking at the the east. Yesterday, we looked at Jordan last week. Jordan is not under Iran. Jordan is Sunni Islam. But on the west coast, Gaza, Lebanon is all Shia today. The west coast of Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Iran's Houthi rebels, they are all Shia rebels. So we have the Shia pressurizing, coming in from the west, and we have the Sunni in Jordan in the east. Right now, the Shia and the Sunni are not able to get along. But will there be one day when the Shia and the Sunni get together and Israel will be caught in between? So keep your mind on that. All right, keep your mind on that. It's going to be a battle between the Shia and the Sunni, and Israel might be caught in between in the end time. So what's happening in Lebanon today? You find that after this explosion last year, Saudi Arabia tried to come in and promised multi-million-dollar aid to help Lebanon restore. But Lebanon rejected Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is Sunni, right? Islam. Lebanon is under Iran. So the stranglehold of the men of the East on Iran is very, very strong. This was under British mandate. We looked at it last week. It's under French territory. So Macron has come twice now to Lebanon, trying to see how France could once again come in to help. And Saudi Arabia was trying to work with Macron to try and bring Lebanon back into the Sunni orbit, right? But Iran's hold is very, very strong on Lebanon. So there is complete chaos right now. Civil war is happening, and 20% of Lebanon is Christian. Remember that. But these Christians, they are not taking care of the people in Lebanon. There's a lot of political patronage there, right? There are shortages there, and currency devaluation there now is very bad there. Their pound, the Lebanese pound, their 1 pound is only worth Malaysian ringgit 20 cents now. So it's just like Japanese currency there now. Complete disintegration of the economic structure in Lebanon. So we are seeing some fulfillment of warnings that Ezekiel has given today. This is the Iranian leader that's overseeing Lebanon today, Nasrallah. Okay, the Hezbollah in Lebanon. They are actually helping Syria prop up the Syrian president Bashar Assad together with Iran, right? So Bashar Assad is alive today just because Iran and Hezbollah are supporting him, right? And he said this: Israel poses a danger on everyone in this region, including Lebanon, and removing Israel is of Lebanese national interest, right? That's quoted in the Jerusalem Post recently. So here we have Hamas in the south, Gaza, trying to destroy Israel from the south, and we have the Hezbollah from the north trying to destroy Israel. And they have 4 times the number of rockets that Gaza has. They've got 160,000 rockets. And the range again, right through all of Israel. Now, I take you to Revelation chapter 18. Okay, we're going to look at Revelation chapter 18. So those of you who have done that, we are looking at comparison between this end time World Trade Center, an end time mercantile power in the end times that God is going to destroy, comparing it with what we see today, which Tyre represented during ancient times. Tyre was the mercantile center of the entire world, the Mediterranean world, during the heydays of Ezekiel. All right, but during our days, what city in the world today controls the trade of the whole world? Okay, so we're going to look at this. And Isaiah 23 says this, that this city is going to be rebuilt in the end time. We look at that. After 70 years, I'm going to visit you again. You are going to be prosperous again, but all your wealth will flow into Israel in the end times. That's what God says. All right, so this is what John saw in the book of Revelation chapter 18. All right, so I'm going to quickly go to it. A glorious angel descended from the sun and shouted to the people of the world, Babylon the Great is fallen. So this is pronouncing the fall of Babylon the Great. It will become a dwelling place for demons, a prison for every foul spirit, a cage for every unclean bird. Demons there. Nations have got drunk by the mad wine of her adulteries. This city. Kings of the earth have committed adultery with you. The merchants of the earth have grown filthy rich from all your luxuries. Okay? And exactly the same verse we saw just now in Ezekiel chapter 27, the same lament that we saw that. Then I heard another voice from heaven saying this, come out of her, my people, warning us, end time people, not to dabble with the power of mystery Babylon today. Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. That means God is going to bring down plagues on her. For her sins are now piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. So whenever sin has piled up to heaven, God will destroy it. Just as the Canaanites, when their sins have piled up to the full, God brought out Moses and the Israelites to take over the land from the Amorites then. All right? So God waits and waits until their sin is piled up to heaven. Then judgment comes. So the call for us not to participate in this end time world commercial trade. Be very careful. It's the same call given to Lot in Genesis 13. All right, so that is Sodom there, and you still went there and pitched your tent there. And we saw that last week. And when it's time to leave, they didn't want to leave. They are so enamored and so attracted to the ways of the sodomic world, Lord, that the angel literally had to drag them out from Sodom. All right, in Genesis chapter 19, you saw that. So don't get wired and don't get enmeshed with the thorns of the world today, according to the parable of the sower in Luke 8, that these thorns are going to choke us in the end. Huh? So remember, there's a warning to flee to us today, all right? Just as there was a warning to flee to Lot in the end time, but there was no warning given by Ezekiel to the people in Tyre. Sudden destruction came, right? 250 years ahead, of course, Ezekiel prophesied that. So Paul says the same thing. All right, do not be part of this world. We have no share in the riches of this world, and so on. Be no part of it. All right, 2 Corinthians chapter 6 there. All right. So Jeremiah warned the people of Israel before the Babylon came. Nebuchadnezzar came and says, flee. Flee with Nebuchadnezzar to Babylon. Don't try and stay in Jerusalem. Jerusalem will be destroyed. Right? So in chapter 24 of Jeremiah, he compares it good figs and bad figs. Those who stay behind, you are the bad figs. you will be destroyed in the end. Those who go to flee to Babylon with Nebuchadnezzar as captive, you will survive and you will come back again. So that is in Jeremiah. Then he says this in verse 6 of Revelation 18, Babylon will be paid double portion. Now, we saw that some time ago. Jerusalem will be paid double portion. He will drink the cup of double iniquity. We saw that. So this is to mystery Babylon, now fulfilled. Babylon's punishment for glorifying herself. If you remember, Nebuchadnezzar said the same thing. Okay, in chapter 4. All right, this is Babylon. All right, I have built it for myself, for my own namesake, for my own glory. At that very moment, God turned him into an animal. So that's in chapter 4 of Daniel. Same thing here. When we take pride and glory in our own position, our own wealth, our own riches, that is a time when God is going to judge. And verse 8 says, Babylon will fall in one day, totally destroyed by fire, the way God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. And we'll find that in Revelation chapter 16, right? So verse 9 says this, the kings of the earth. Now Ezekiel said the same thing, the kings of the earth, all right, who committed fornication, and the kings of the earth who have lived luxuriously with Babylon, with Tyre, modern Tyre, they will weep and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning. And they stand at a distance for fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, that great city, that mighty city, in 1 hour your judgment has come. Right? So the kings of the earth look at the fall of this great city in the end time, standing afar, dare not go near. And in 1 hour you will fall. Your entire economic, financial system in the world will come collapsing down very quickly. Okay? So we find the same thing there in Ezekiel. Now in verse 11, the merchants of the earth, all right, just now we look at the kings. Now we look at the merchants of the earth. They will also weep and mourn over her, for no one now buys their merchandise anymore. Gold, silver, precious stones, pearl, cinnamon, incense, fragrant oil, frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle, sheep, horses, and chariots, bodies and souls of men. Slave trade. Ancient times in Ezekiel, same thing was mentioned. Look at verses 5 to 29. I skipped through all that. Tyre had dealings with more than 20 different nations, all of them listed in those few verses. And the list of goods that were traded is exactly the same list as mentioned here in Revelation chapter 18. Slave trade today, right? We find that happening. Women, all right, children, and so on. And they will say, the fruit you long for is gone from you, your luxury, your splendor have all vanished. And 3 times it mentioned this. I have no time to go through this in Revelation chapter 18. And the merchants of all these goods, the world's merchants who became rich by her, they will stand at a distance for fear of her torment, weeping and wailing and saying, alas, alas, for in 1 hour all their riches and all their goods and all their debentures and all their stocks have come to nothing. Right? And today we see Wall Street, World Trade, your merchants were the great men of the earth. And USA today is the greatest merchant of death today. All right? You see what's happening in Ukraine, the amount of armaments that have been shipped into Ukraine from US, billions of dollars from NATO as well, for 25 countries all shipping armaments into Ukraine. You see these things all happening again today. Now, all right, so we looked at kings, we look at traders and merchants, now we look at ship captains, shipmaster. So every shipmaster, verse 17, all who travel by ship, sailors, traders, they all also stood at a distance and cried out when they saw the smoke of a burning, what is like this great city? And they threw dust on their heads. And they cried out, weeping and wailing and saying, alas, alas, that great city in which all who had ships of the sea became rich by her wealth. In 1 hour she is made desolate. All right. Okay, let's carry on. So, what is this? This is pride. All right, the pride, the greed that they have, that would be their downfall. As it happened in Tyre, it will happen again in Revelation, because God hates self-elevation. So when the world is self-elevated today and they look at their own status as the wealthiest nations in the world today, that's when God brings us down. So Paul gives us a very, very strong warning here. Through the grace given to me, let me say this to all of you, not to think of ourselves more highly than we ought to think, right? Always to be humble, all right? Because God is going to deal with every one of you, as mentioned in all these verses here. All right, Moody says the same thing. Be humble, or God is going to humble you. All right, you stumble, okay? So we are going to deal with this topic of pride for the next 3 weeks. The rulers of Tyre, we saw that. Sidon next week. Pharaoh of Egypt, they are all proud rulers, and they say that I am the king of the jungle, I am the god of this world. All right. President Biden says we are setting up a new world order, and America has to be in charge. We are the king of the new world order, never realizing that the world today has become a multipolar world. America still wants it to be a unipolar thing, and they're using Ukraine to do that. Huh? We're going to look at this verse next week. The fall of Satan in Isaiah chapter 14, the fall of Lucifer, is also because of pride. The five I wills. I will set up my throne. I will ascend to heaven. All right. I will set up my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of congregation in the north. All right. And I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. So Lucifer, in her pride, said this, and God cast her down. All right. So we're going to look at this power next week. All right. So this is going to be the fall of Tyre, as well as a symbol of this mighty city in the end. A foreshadow of what we see in Tyre that will be fulfilled in Revelation chapter 18, when there is this world trade system that's making all the nations rich today. And God says in Revelation 18, verse 10, verse 17, verse 19, three times in 1 hour, all your wealth will be brought to ruin. All right, and we see that happening. Chapter 16, in the seventh bowl, that mystery Babylon is going to be split into three ways. That whole city is going to be cast down. The angel is going to cast a mighty rock on the city. That city is going to split, and the entire city is going to be submerged. So is Tyre a parallel to one of our major trade cities in the world today? What is our Tyre? Where is our Tyre today? Where is the mystery Babylon today? All right, which is the trading center in the world that makes all the kings of the earth rich. All right, so Bible prophecies are looking at New York City, which once upon a time controlled the world trade. And we see in 1 hour, I told you last week, actually the Twin Towers, this South Tower here, it took exactly 1 hour for this tower to fall, to collapse. Exactly 1 hour. From the time the plane hit till its final collapse. 1 hour. And Bible scripture says in 1 hour, you'll be brought down to ruin. Okay? Today, the greatest spot is still in North Los Angeles there, all right? San Francisco. Shanghai is number 3. Singapore is number 4, number 5 today. Abu Dhabi, Dubai. Some of the commentators are looking at Middle East cities, because he is talking about throwing ash on your head, and so these are Middle East customs of remorse, not Western, right? So it's mentioned in Ezekiel, it's mentioned in Revelation, that the merchants of the kings all will lament and pour ash on their head. So is it possible that an end time city will be somewhere in the Middle East? That's another option that you might want to look at. Okay. The other thing is this. You'll notice the kings, the merchants, the sailors, they were all standing afar off. They dare not come near to Mystery Babylon when Mystery Babylon was destroyed. They stood afar off and they cried and lamented. Why are they afraid to come near? Why are they grieving? Same thing is happening today. You see that. All these nations, they are afraid to be identified with Russia. They are all taking the stand of America to put sanction Australia, but they are hurting themselves. That's what's happening in Europe. So they are crying. They are crying. All their energy is gone, but they dare not go against USA. They are all joining in these nations to condemn Russia, standing afar off at their own lamenting. Okay, and very few dare to side with Russia in the end. Right? Let's say if Russia is collapsing today, who dares to side with Russia and come against America? We see that happening in the world today. Biden is putting pressure, threatening China, threatening India, all right, to join this thing. So we see these things happening. Just as the disciples of Jesus, when Jesus was hanging on the cross there, who was at the foot of the cross? No one. All the disciples fled. They were looking at a distance, lamenting the death of their Savior from far off. They dare not come near to be identified with Jesus because the Romans were looking for them. The Jewish Sanhedrin were looking for all these Galileans who were followers of Jesus. We see the same thing happening today. That's what we see, standing afar. Dare not associate with them, the pride of the nation. So when the World Trade Center fell, look at what President Bush said. President Bush quoted this, Isaiah chapter 9. This is when the Israelites, after Assyria took away the northern tribes of Israel, they said this, Ephraim and Samaria, with pride and arrogance, they said this, the bricks have fallen, but we will rebuild with new stones. The fig trees have fallen, but we will replace it with cedars. And verse 11, Isaiah chapter 9 says this, but the Lord has strengthened Rezin's foes against them and spurred their enemies on, so the Lord will cut off from Israel both head and tail in one day. When the World Trade Center fell, President Bush quoted from this verse to say, we will rebuild. And they build this World Trade Center again today, not in structure, but as a memorial and so on, with a beacon of light that shines up there at ground zero. Right? So the same pride we see here, but God says, I will destroy you. I will destroy you. All right? So just some parallel pictures that we see there. So in her, Revelation 18 verse 24 says, this city of mystery Babylon, in her was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints and all who have been slain on earth. So we are going to see this end time city will also be a city where all the saints, the church, the believers, the Jews will be persecuted. Those who do not receive the mark of the beast, they are going to be killed. Revelation 20 says that they are going to be beheaded and so on. So which city will that be? Jerusalem has always been known as a city that have killed the prophets, right? Jesus says, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who have killed the prophets. So will this mystery Babylon be Jerusalem? As I mentioned to you previously, Jerusalem has been known as the harlot. Mystery Babylon is the mother of all harlots. So are we looking at Jerusalem as this end time city, Middle East kingdom, World Trade Center? Not yet, but maybe. Or are we looking at Rome? Rome also killed a lot of saints in its days of persecution under Emperor Nero on the Christians and so on. So a lot of scholars also look at this end time Babylon as Rome. There are scholars with different views, but we just keep an eye on what's happening today in the world. Is going to become a one world center, a globalist empire. President Biden says we will be in charge. Which city is going to be that trading center in the world today? Could it be a new city in the Middle East? I studied that with you in the book of Revelation before. Saudi Arabia is building huge cities that are going to take over the trade of the world and so on in Northwest Arabia. Watch that. Jeddah, from Jeddah upwards north, is already controlling 25% of the trade in that area now. So things are moving fast. I won't take a stand on which city, New York or Shanghai or some city, Abu Dhabi or what in the Middle East, but keep your eye open. Because Revelation says this, Ezekiel 27 says this in the end, this world trade port city that controls the entire trading mechanism in the world, God is going to judge in the end time. Right? A one world government, Revelation chapter 18, a one world religion, Revelation chapter 17. The two of them combined together somewhere in the Middle East, possibly. Uh, the light of the Lamb will never shine in you again. That's the last verse in chapter 18. The happy voices of the brides and grooms will never be heard in you again. We saw that in chapter 27 of Ezekiel, right? Your music and everything will be gone. That means this city is going to go under together with all the other nations of the world. Okay? Go and read Revelation 16, the seventh bowl. Now, at the end of that verse, it says, but heaven rejoices. So as the kings, the merchants, the shipmasters and traders, as they all mourn in 18 and Ezekiel 27, Revelation 18 verse 20, the scene switches to heaven and the angel says this, rejoice over her, you heaven, all you holy apostles and prophets, for now God has taken vengeance on your behalf. You who have been martyred, you who have cried out, when will you avenge our blood? That is the time when God avenge on you. Revelation chapter 5, God says, Revelation chapter 6, 15, God says, wait until all the saints that are ought to come in has come in. All right, and then I will take vengeance for you. So Revelation 18 fulfills that promise in Revelation chapter 6. Right. So Jesus mentioned of this, that in the end times, you'll be persecuted and you'll be brought into the synagogues. Your religious institutions are going to persecute you in the end times. Jesus says that in John chapter 16. So come out of her. Don't believe in the end time that all these false institutions, because they are all going to be deceived by Antichrist in the end. Hold fast to just the word of God. Right? And don't look to men's doctrines. Don't look to the world. Right? The warning to Lot, the warning to us is today exactly the same. And the world's power, trading network and so on, they are all going to be replaced by the return of Christ and his new kingdom in Revelation chapter 19. Okay? So that's Ezekiel 26-27, comparing it with Revelation chapter 18 in the end times. Next week, read just one chapter. It's going to be a very short session next week. Just the king of Tyre. All right? The king of Tyre and the power that is behind the king of Tyre. All right? So as I mentioned just now, also go to Isaiah chapter 14. Okay, so before we end, can I have that song again? Not my will, but thy will be done. All right, look at the first stanza. The world, as we come to the world, to the end of the times, end time, this self-conceit that is in Babylon, that's in Tyre, the self-pride, self-exaltation, learn to humble ourselves. Even as Jesus humbled himself to the will of God in the Garden of Gethsemane. Not my will, but thy be done. 3 times Jesus prayed that in the Garden of Gethsemane. Learn to submit ourselves and be humble, and do not be tempted by the ways of the world in the end time. So let this be our prayer. Let's go through the song and the lyric again and close this session properly. Okay? Yeah, okay.
You shall walk, held by your same unchanging love. Be still, my soul. Oh, lift your voice and pray. Father, not my will, but yours be done. How in that garden he persisted, I may never fully know the fearful weight of true obedience. It was held by him alone. One wondrous faith to bear that cross, to bear my sin. What wondrous love! My hope was sure when there my Savior prayed. Father, not my will, but yours be done. When I am lost, when I am broken, in the night of fear and doubt, still I will trust in my good Father. Yes, to one great King I bow. As Jesus rose, so I shall rise in ransom glory at the throne. My heart restored, with all your saints I sing. Father, not my will, but yours be done. As we go forth, thou God and Father, lead us daily in the fight, that all the world might see your glory and your name be lifted high. And in this name we overcome, for you shall see us safely home. Now as your church we lift our voice and pray. Father, not my will, but yours be done. And in this name we overcome, for you shall see us safely home. Now as your church we lift our voice and pray. Father, not my will, but yours be done. Father, not my will, but yours be done. Father, not my will, but yours be done.
Amen.